This episode of the Luminaries on Deep in the Weeds is proudly supported by Deputy, rostering and timesheets without the usual chaos.
The overarching mission of St. Peter was to just make sure everybody had a wonderful dinner. That was it. Like, just make sure everybody has a great piece of fish. And I'd be lying to say that if I wasn't trying to not replicate, but just be as similar in standards of what Fish Face was. I was just trying to make sure that Fish Face Darlinghurst continued and had a little bit of legacy of what Stephen did into what I do now.
This is the Luminaries on the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. It's easy to break the rules. It's easy to shock people. Just about anyone can be a one-trick pony, but challenging perceptions, challenging beliefs, turning myths on their heads, opening minds to a different perspective, to a different approach for a different experience. That takes a solid foundation, grit, and a lot of dedication. Josh Niland is the chef and owner of St. Peter, the Fish Butchery and Charcoal Fish. Josh, how are you?
I'm pretty tired, but I'm good. How are you?
Well, you've been incredibly busy. You've just recently opened Charcoal Fish, and we can get to that soon. But you've really turned the myths and perceptions of seafood globally on their head. But tell us about the foundations that you built early on in your career to allow you to do that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's always flattering to hear that sort of thing. Foundations. I think I think it was more at school. Our school at Maitland Grosman High, they got gifted a coffee machine when I was, I think, 14, and I was in year 9, I think, and I was doing food technology, and our class got gifted a coffee machine, and I just thought that was the coolest thing ever. And to have it just sitting idle for teachers to use in their lunch breaks, I thought was a missed opportunity. So I asked them, would it be possible if I could set up a little coffee shop at lunchtime? And I mean, talk about putting yourself under the pump with HSC students and, kids in year 8 thinking they're really cool drinking lattes and stuff. But I just thought it would be a nice thing to do on the lunch break. Was to make a few coffees. So I started watching videos of, Mr. Paul Bassett doing Lavazza training courses and doing all these things to just try to do something a bit different and try to see what the feedback was. Like, I think I was just more keen to get some feedback on something that I was interested in. And so I did that. And then I took a job in a cafe close to home in East Maitland at a little coffee shop. And I got some really amazing training where I got to learn how to make some mayonnaise, and I learned how to assemble a sandwich correctly, and then, make coffee, which I think at the time I was really quite interested in, and I thought that was quite a skillful technique that I could use. So the Thursday night late shopping was the big thing in East Maitland, and all my mates would end up there, walking around pretty much just because there was nothing better to do in East Maitland on a Thursday night. And I would always ask if I could stay back to vacuum the floors to see if I could get an extra $50 out of the boss. And so that's what I did. And after doing 12 months in this coffee shop and really trying to learn a little bit more about hospitality and socially engaging with a customer, I felt I was best prepared and ready to sort of say to mum and dad, hey, I really want to be a chef and I really want to do an apprenticeship and go and learn more about this, because it kind of got to the point where in year 10, we're getting ready. Do we go and do year 11 and 12? What subjects are we going to pick? All of those things. And my mates had all kind of selected what they were going to do. And I was just wondering how many hospitality or food technology classes I could get my hands on. So I just said to mum and dad, I said, look, I really love school and I feel I'm okay at it. I enjoy English. I enjoy science. I enjoy all my work at school, but I wish there was, 15 lessons of hospitality. Can I do this apprenticeship? And so then, mum and dad straight on board, and they were the ones driving me around to restaurant to see if I could get an interview and a trial. And, we'd have a few meals here and there just to test the waters in a few places. And then I ended up settling on a restaurant in Newcastle, which is the brewery restaurant, which no longer is there. But the team that were behind that project have got East End Hub, which is Elizabeth Box and Anthony Cosen, powerhouse husband and wife team that, opened my kind of eyes in terms of work ethic, putting education and training before the ego of of composed food. You know what I mean? Like there was this real deep rooted desire to educate a young team. I mean, I think I was one of 3 or 4 apprentices that they had in their team, which was just extraordinary. I know many restaurants have apprentices, but it just seems like such a commitment and a big amount of energy that's gone into the training of these people. And so Anthony took me under his wing, and he was always reading the newest cookbook, and he was always watching the newest, Ramsay show. And, he was always trying to show me a better way of doing things. But also there were some hard lessons in there as well. Naturally a challenging environment for any first year, because there was aspirations of being the best at that time. But I think the best thing that I got out of working in Newcastle was, obviously I was half an hour from home, and I managed to pick up my hours very quickly to get my red peas. So few L plate trips with mum back and forth, eventually then getting my license and getting more confident in my work. Basically, after 12 months or 18 months that I was there, I decided that it was time to move to Sydney. And although having been asked by Peter Doyle at S Restaurant to move to the city 6 months prior, mum had a pretty tight hold of my hand to make sure that I didn't go anywhere too soon. So I ended up moving down to Sydney when I was 17. And I started working with Luke Mangan at Glass Brasserie. And yeah, that was kind of the beginning of the hospitality journey. And I think, the deep rooted reason I feel that I love food so much and why I love this industry so much is probably seeded from mum. And that's not to say that I was underneath a table, with mum making pasta by any means. It was always, flicking Latina fresh out of the packet. But it was this kind of, when I was sick, when I was younger, when I was 8 and I was getting chemotherapy, twice a week, after that, coming back from the half an hour trip to Newcastle to go to the John Hunter Hospital and then half an hour home, before I went back to school, mum would cook me a hot lunch or a cold lunch, whatever, but majoritively it was always a hot lunch. You'd have a pie that she'd make, or, just something simple, and then make sure you sit down, you'd eat your lunch, get changed, get ready, and then go back to school. So yes, it was hugely disruptive to be away from school for a couple of hours each kind of couple of days from school. But for mum to be able to stop, be present, slow down, cook me lunch, and then send me back off to school and then carry on with her day, I think that was just one of the most generous acts of hospitality and motherhood. And just, it was such a kind thing to do. And I know that goes without saying because it's your mum, right? But I think that you just look like, we've got 3 kids now, and you look at how fleeting the days are and how intense they are and how much, how much work you have to do in a day. But then for that to all just get big handbrake pulled up on it, and let's just sit down and have some lunch together, and then we can go back into it. And I think for that reason, I've always enjoyed the gesture of feeding someone and looking at, some kind of emotion displayed, be it positive or negative, on the back of something that you've given them. I think that's a really powerful thing.
That childhood illness that you had, what sort of impact did that have on you? Is that the backbone of the drive that you have? Did it make you grow up quicker? What sort of impact did it have?
Yeah, I think it, Well, it's a tricky one because it was a lot to take on board. Like, you get told, your son may die, and you hear that get said to your parents. And now, in hindsight, looking back at that, for them to have kept it together as well as they did, I think is a credit to them. And we don't really talk about it too much post everything happening, because it was a fairly intense time in our lives. But I do believe that it definitely gave me, a sense of purpose and motivation, and that life is all very, it can be very fleeting, and that, you need to take your opportunities when they come. And I wouldn't say that it motivates me by any means, but I think it's just the rocket pack on your back, where you're just like, if you want something, then you go after it and you get it. And if you can't get it, then, like, what do you have to do that? Like, how do I articulate this? I think it's more writing down your thoughts as frequently as you can, so that if something's not quite right, then you can actually articulate them on paper and then get about sorting it out afterwards. And that's something that I've always continued to do, whether it's manually writing it down, because I do enjoy the art of putting pen to paper, or if it's just putting things into your mobile phone. But I do keep track of things that I want to be intentional with and that I do want to prioritize.
Give us a sense of the young Josh Niland that came to Sydney when he was 17 and you worked in some incredible restaurants as you built your career. What was the young Josh Niland like, and do you have any stories of that time?
I think I was relatively arrogant, and thought that, I was coming to the big smokes to really kind of step it up a notch and get stuck into it. Having, I wouldn't by any means say that I conquered Newcastle. It was just a beginning where a lot of people were around you, not pumping you up by any means, but definitely giving you the good structured, backbone of your technique and skill that you needed to go into Sydney. Because I remember having a conversation with my chef Anthony and saying, all right, I'm going to go to Sydney. And he's like, oh, all right, well, here's all the things that you don't know how to do and that I don't think you're as good at as you think you are. So there was a real clear, let's hone in on these areas before you head off. And that was very, very helpful. But I remember just being in awe of the whole Sydney dining scene. I mean, before even taking a job with Luke, I think my first, big fancy dining experience was at Aria. I was with my sister and my sister's friend, and I was, I don't know, maybe 16, and obviously I'd eaten at Est as well by myself, and I'd met Peter, but going to Aria as well, to just sit in that room and see Matt come out and go table to table and saying hello to everybody, and even then going to Assiette and seeing Warren Turnbull, running around like a madman in that kitchen, and watching Justin North run around crazy, and Baccass, and it was and then Facet 4 in hand. There was all these guys that were like head down bummer, getting the job done, and I was just in complete awe of their teams and their skills, and how visible it all was. And I think that was one of the big things. There was a big sense of an open kitchen back then, and I know there is now, but you think back to all those big, grand, open, even intimate small rooms, they were all very open, and you could see everything, and you could see what kind of pace you were walking into, and what the expectations were on a young chef in that team. So to get the job at Glass was incredible, and I was put onto pastry straight away. And the pastry kitchen, if you haven't been into Glass Brasserie, is, quite a grand setting. It's right at the front door. And I just remember being told that some of my tasks would be to bake up 100 brulees in the morning, and then segment down a couple of boxes of oranges ready for crepe Suzette, and, zesting oranges and, buttering and sugaring, molds ready to go for souffles, and then dropping those souffles to order. And, like all of those real desserts that required actual skill and knowledge to be able to produce consistently throughout an a la carte service. And, it was very manual, and it was very exciting. And working under Leanne Beck at the time was intense and quite, there was a lot being asked of you. But Joe Pavlovich commanded the respect of that whole kitchen, and it was reciprocated. We all just watched Joe in awe of how he could lead a brigade of some 22, 23 cooks and get through 350 covers like it was nothing. It was, I still think back, and watching Joe pick up 16 dockets across his hands and then just scream at us all, basically, in terms of what he needed. And to watch Marjan Alguera, MJ, on the meat section, squeezing and poking and prodding about, 24 steaks at one time, categorizing his rares away from his medium rares, away from his medium wells and his mediums. And, it was insane. There was no kind of cryovac pouches of here's the 25 rare bags that I set before service. It was manually done to order, and the garlic and the thyme thrown into the pan to baste over the top of the steak. Everything was manual, and everything was, of the highest standard. And those kinds of things were just so critical in my learning. But to answer your question, which I haven't done yet, what was I like? I think I was learning meat and chicken and fish and all these things at TAFE at Ultimo College. And I was kind of just like, wow, I wish I could do that at my work. Kind of, frustrated that I'm on pastry. And I felt at the time, I was like, well, they've just forgotten about me. I'm just a soldier. I'm a cog in the works. And I'm just turning up, and I'm doing my brulees, and so it's easy to think back in hindsight and go, well, that was all wonderful education. And that's something that, I'll always be glad that I did. But at the time, you're just like, well, I'd kind of like to be, MJ, kind of squeezing steak, because that makes me a real chef, right? And so I ended up doing a trial at Restaurant Balzac with Matt Kemp. And this was about 6 months after being into Sydney. And I went to Balzac, and I was just like, wow, this is incredible. Matt's here. His wife's on the floor. The brigade's full of these guys that all just look like they just haven't slept in weeks. It's just hardcore, intense, backs to the wall, but everybody was just running, and they wanted to be the best. And I just thought it was the coolest thing ever. And I got shown all the right things on my trial, and I just thought, well, this is great. And so I went back to work the next day, and as I came through the front doors, I had Luke Mangan in the bar standing next to Joe Pavlovich, and they said, all right, take a seat. And I was like, oh, what's going on, fellas? And then they said, oh, how did Balzac go? And then at that point, I realized how small Sydney was and how much of an idiot I was. And I was embarrassed, and I was shocked. And, it was a big ego check that I thought that I was ready for something else when really I'd only just begun. And basically, Luke Mangan said to me in that moment, he said, Rome wasn't built in a day, and you've got to start at the bottom and you've got to work your way up. And I think it was then at that point where they realized, I think as much as I realized, that I really wanted to be as good as I could be. Like, I really wanted to get as much out of this experience as I could. And I don't know whether it took me doing something silly like that to be noticed or to have their attention. But then from that point, then they put me into the hot kitchen. I did the cold section, and then I did some garnish work as well. And then I got to do a bit of meat garnish. And so then there was but then I got pushed even harder, and I got to see more, and I gained a lot more from that experience. So, a little bit of a curly beginning. But I ended up doing, about close to 18 months at Glass Brasserie, and that was 18 months of 200-seat, hardcore bistro brasserie work, which I loved very much.
You've worked with many incredible chefs like Peter Doyle and Steve Hodges, but your understanding of seafood is incredible. But when did you first start realizing or having an interest in seafood and realizing the opportunities?
Well, yeah, again, it's very kind to say that. I mean, when you work for somebody like Stephen Hodges, and when you have Peter Doyle as a mentor, and somebody who has always had, a significantly strong, seafood based repertoire, it's easy like to really take a lot of inspiration from their cuisine, and to also be just in complete awe and admiration to how they work. I think Peter, obviously, with his beginnings at Reflection, and Cicada, and Celsius, and all these kind of, like, he had his own businesses, and there was a sense of like no waste, and being respectful to make sure that you use everything. There was no three hat budget where you could just purchase, and then disregard what goes in the bin. So there was a real sense of knowledge about what to do tomorrow when today's food is no longer today's. So there was a lot of good learning from that. But then working for Stephen, I've never met another fish chef with the kind of acumen for fish as Stephen. Like, to have the ability to have fish continue to arrive to the door without knowledge of what we're going to receive. We just basically said we want the best all the time. We don't have any bias over what species comes in, but we just want the best. So that would mean in a week, you would see upwards of 20 to 25 species of fish come through the door. And that was, I feel incredibly spoiled to have been 18 years old with being underneath Stephen's arm, basically being ushered through Australia's, waters, basically, and being told, no, don't steam that one. No, you have to pan fry that one. Don't poach that one. No, you have to do it, bake it like this. And, it was really intense black and white information that was just like, don't do that, do this. And it was just clear. And once that came out of his mouth once, then it never changed. Like, that was just law. And then leaving from Fish Face at that time to then go and work in other restaurants, you never forget what Stephen said. You always were respectful to whoever your chef was next. But then upon returning back to Fish Face later in my cooking, he was as consistent, if not more focused on what he had originally said all those years ago. So he was very consistent with his education. And to kind of speak to how have you accumulated the amount of knowledge that you have, I think it's because with people like Peter and Stephen pouring all of themselves into me and educating me personally and having a sense of responsibility with their teachings as well. Like, if there was no intimacy of learning, if there was no intimacy of like, this is how you do it, and I wouldn't do it like that, and these 3 times back at Pier with Greg, and, these 2 times back at Reflections, or, the kind of really interesting, fascinating historical knowledge of what they've done with similar species and with similar ingredients, I just keep putting that in the bank. Like, I just keep putting that in notebooks and just writing them down at the end of the day, because eventually they'll be useful. They will be extremely helpful one day. Even if they don't make sense right this second, they will be extremely handy. And one particular case that came up was when Stephen, in a lucid state of, craziness one night, making bouillets at 1 a.m. with me cleaning the kitchen down with one other person, we were listening to Stephen just bang on about everything. And I just said to him, hey, I'm actually finding it difficult to continue to produce garnish after garnish after garnish with all of these different species that are coming in, with respect to trying to make sure that people actually understand the flavor of the fish, but whilst also making sure that people understand that what I'm trying to do with this fish is exciting and worth coming to Fish Face for. And this was when I was like, I think 19. And obviously at that time I was just really wanting to impress upon everybody. And I think you in particular, whenever you'd come into Fish Face, I think I remember giving you a piece of, soy marinated hapuka milt that I'd had in soy for some 4 or 5 weeks, just thinking it was the coolest thing ever. And I needed somebody who kind of got it to taste it. And you came and did that. And even things like the John Dory liver and parsley on toast as well. So I was trying really hard. But I remember just saying to Steve, how best would you go about garnish selection with regards to fish species coming through the door, so that you didn't, mollycoddle mollycoddle the garnish too much and make sure that the fish was still the hero. And he said, well, rather than thinking of fish like fish, why don't you just think of it more like meat? And he was just yelling basically the whole time. And I just thought, well, that's really interesting. He goes, well, how many bloody recipes have you got for a pig? And how many recipes have how many times have you cooked a beef fillet? And how many times have you cooked a pigeon? And he was just ranting off all these things about how a pigeon can almost be as similar to a blue mackerel. And then, when you look at a tuna loin, it could almost look like a beef fillet. And the fact that swordfish nearly looks like a pig. And he was just bashing out all these different hypotheticals. And I just thought, well, that's really interesting. And it actually did become really a lot simpler to select garnishes based on the knowledge that, well, if this was a cow, then I could actually do this in such a way that it makes more sense to me, rather than just rolling out the lemon wedges and braised fennel and, tomatoes and all the habitual routine fish garnishes that we forever have eaten and cooked as chefs. So I wouldn't say that I went to the same extremes and lengths that I have now to this day, but it was just a really encouraging kind of wild conversation that took place one night, that I don't know if he even remembers, but it was a good little leg up, and it was something that got squirreled away into my notebook and made sense later.
Well, let's have a look at what you've built. You started with St. Peter, and how difficult was it challenging the realms and myths of seafood, but also running your own business and having those responsibilities?
Yeah, I think as well, and I know you know this as well, but Julie, my wife, she's an incredible chef, like, period. She worked at the Cass and Mark and Aqua Dining, and then at Est as well, and at the Fat Duck. So she's, extremely talented, and also opened Sixpenny. And we just decided that we wanted to start a family. And we wanted to be based here in Sydney. And so the desires to work overseas or, in other parts of the world was just not there. We just really loved Sydney, and we wanted to be close to our families and have our own. So St. Peter is really the unpacking of what Julie and I love the most about eating. And I think St. Peter started as being inspired so much by the restaurants like St. John and Saison in San Francisco when it was in its original space, and a number of just little, small, nice, just beautiful restaurants where it's usually the chef cooking for you, and the menu being, really transient and just changing based on the seasons, and offering an a la carte experience. That was the kind of model that we wanted to do. So Julie and I came to each other on the same day with St. Peter as the name, just coincidentally. Because I said, I know what we're going to call the restaurant. And she goes, oh, I thought of a name too. What did you think? I said, well, St. Peter. And then she's like, what? That's exactly what I was going to say. And then, but she hadn't quite unpacked it as thoroughly as what I had in my head, in the sense that it was to reference the John Dory in the form of Saint Pierre, but also the patron saint of fishermen. And the black spot that represents St. Peter is the spot of the John Dory where it got marked with the finger when it got taken out of the water. So there's a whole lot of reference points with regards to fish that is the name St. Peter, although a lot of people still come in and call me Peter. But yeah, Julie and I opened it. Julie made all the tables in the restaurant. She sanded them all back. She, oiled them all. She assembled them all. It was quite amazing. There was a restaurant, Spiedo, at Westfield, which Alessandro had, and upon its completion of its time there, we went in and kind of cleaned up the scraps a little bit. And so we took the banquette, we took all the chairs, we took all the table bases, we took gastronomes and bowls and whisks and all those things, because we were doing this ourselves. Like, this was our money. This was the most risky thing that we've ever done. And we had no bearings of if it was going to work or not, so we didn't want to overcapitalize on things at the beginning. So we rounded all that up, and we'd found a great space which used to be Toco on Oxford Street, Paddington. And it's funny that, you know, St. Peter used to be a sushi restaurant, sushi train. But we took down the 42 downlights and we stripped off the 8 inches of pleather and like Japanese trees that had been painted over the walls and stuff. We ripped everything out basically. And Julie drew so many different variations of what that restaurant would look like, based on how many seats can we get in there and how little of a kitchen can we give you, so that we can get as many people in there as we can, so that we don't, you know, shoot ourselves in the foot. And, you know, we opened basically, and we did so in a way that we felt confident that we could pay back the money that we'd spent. And I just remember, I know I've told this story before, but we spent $4,500 on fish on the first delivery, and that just scared the life out of me. And that was only fish, and then all the other things on top of that. And it was just Alana Sapwell, my other old chef that I had, Ollie Penmit, and myself in the kitchen. And then, you know, day one of our adventure with St. Peter, we lost our restaurant manager. Things just didn't work out. And then we were restaurant managerless for a whole day of frantically trying to patch that hole. And then, like an angel, Wimmy Winkler appeared and said, I'll help you out for the weekend. And I just thought, well, that's great. We'll throw her in. And then Saturday morning, we opened for our first official service, and 10 a.m., you know, you got Pat and Miffy out the front, and you've got, you know, Terry booked in for dinner, and, you know, all that stuff. Like, you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders, and also, you know, the weight of money that you've spent that you haven't paid back yet, and all those sorts of things as well. But the priority, obviously, is to make sure that everybody gets it and everybody understands what you're trying to do, and also that the product's excellent. And so you just rely on just the scent of an oily rag, basically, to keep you going, because there's no drinking water, there's no eating food, there's no sleeping. You just go. And that's really, you know, that's really hard. You look back on that and you think, wow, I don't know how we got through it, but you do. And, you know, Wimmy stayed beyond the weekend, and just a couple of months ago, turned 5 years with us. So Wimmy's, you know, still extremely, you know, huge part of our operation that we have now. But yeah, Julie and I just navigated it each week. Got a good accountant. He gave us the best advice each week on how to weather some storms. I mean, there was occasions where we spent too much on food, and, you know, we didn't have enough staff, and then, you know, that flipped back the other way, and, you know, Vivid happened, and then everybody leaves the leaves the suburbs and goes to the city. And yeah, so there was just so many lessons to learn. But basically, it was just the overarching mission of St. Peter was to just make sure everybody had a wonderful dinner. That was it. Like, just make sure everybody has a great piece of fish. And I'd be lying to say that if I wasn't trying to not replicate, but just be as similar in standards of what Fish Face was. I was just trying to make sure that Fish Face Darlinghurst continued and had a little bit of legacy of what Stephen did into what I do now.
This episode of the Luminaries on Deep in the Weeds is proudly supported by Deputy, helping managers and staff do their best work.
Hospitality is all about the connection. A business starts with passion, but gets bogged down with all the complexities that come with life, society, and rules. If you can simplify this mundane, then people can be happy and they can thrive. And when you have happy staff members and happy managers, your customers will sense it. They'll be happy. And you create that connection. That connection is hospitality is about.
For more information, go to deputy.com. Was there a moment that you felt comfortable in your feet and you felt St. Peter was where you wanted it to be, and you then had the confidence to really branch out and do what you've done now?
Not at all. I mean, still no. still no. Like, and that's not, like, I mean, the caliber of staff that we have now, the team that we have in place is just extraordinary. And, you know, you'd be able to leave and everything would be totally fine and great. But there's no like, oh, sweet, we made it to, you know, and like, it's just funny how things just changed. Like, the reason Fish Butchery opened was because we ran out of room at St. Peter. St. Peter basically it was a 34-seat restaurant that was doing 95 people in a service. And it got to the point where it was like, I actually can't hang any more fish from anything in our cool room. And I can't make another eye chip because a fish only has 2 eyes. And I can't put another liver on toast because it's just one liver. And so the expectations of having a St. Peter experience was becoming a burden somewhat. Like, I couldn't produce the menu that I wanted to give people or what was being expected of St. Peter to give to people. I mean, the New York Times wrote about us and said about it's the place to get, you know, an extremely creative experience with fish and, you know, such high standards and all that sort of stuff. And that was like, you know, that was extremely flattering and wonderful. But 6 months after that, then we had to open Fish Butchery because we just couldn't manage what was happening. So we opened Fish Butchery 10 doors up in a hair salon. And, you know, coincidentally, it was 20 years prior, it was a cafe. So it still had grease trap and it still had exhaust and things there. So we got really lucky in that sense again. So again, the ambition was not to overcapitalize, but it was to make sure that we prioritized exactly what we needed to spend and, you know, what were the most big ticket, high impact details of that business that we could execute. And that was to make sure that there was full transparency of the product. So to take inspiration from Loon in Melbourne and the croissant making system that they have in place at their, you know, at their big shop, it was to put a big piece of marble in the middle of the room, put a glass box on the end of it, and then anything that came in that day would be very well manicured and placed into that little glass cube at the end in a singular form. And then over the top of that marble might be, you know, 500 kilos of Bruce's fish from the corner inlet, or, you know, 4 big tunas from Heidi up in Mooloolaba. Like, to have that available and visible to Sydney-siders, I thought was just, you know, a wonderful thing, especially on Oxford Street, Paddington, where it's always been, you know, haute couture. It's always been fashion. And, you know, it's always been, you know, this really visible, you know, shopping precinct. But then to come in and feel a similar sense of boutique, but fish, you know, so the location of where Fish Butchery is lended itself as to a decision to why to dress it up in such a way. So Paul Farag and Todd Garrett were hugely, you know, like such a good foundation to have those two in there upon opening, to make sure that the systems and standards were all there, and to make sure that the quality of fish going across to St. Peter and that was going out retail was of the highest standard. So, yeah, Fish Butchery exists because St. Peter ran out of room, and St. Peter needed a supplier that was producing the work that was in my head. So we became our own supplier, basically. So that's why that exists, yeah.
St. Peter is very different to what it originally began as, in the sense of the experience that you have when you walk in the restaurant. COVID's changed many things for many people. What sort of impact has it had on what you do at St. Peter and the Fish Butchery?
Yeah. I mean, COVID's been a hugely damaging experience for so many people, and I would never have wished for this to happen ever. And I mean, I find myself in a somewhat fortunate position where we've been able to continue producing our work, and we've been able to continue to engage with our guests and make sure that we, you know, keep working hard through all of this and making sure that we keep our staff employed. That's been a real priority. But to have written the whole fish cookbook and then gone up to Brisbane to Good Food Guide and then losing the chef's hat, which was all extremely important at that time. I, you know, sitting in that room up in Brisbane was embarrassing and disappointing. and frustrating and all of those things, because it's a real big kind of, I'd be like, I mean, it's the kind of thing, do you talk about this or don't you? And it's like, it's so, like, you wear it so heavy. I mean, you go through January, February, March, April, May, June, July, and you don't want to not be there ever. Like, you want to be on every single service, so much so that you're belittling, the abilities of the staff that you have. And yeah, for the handful of services that I found myself absent during that time, then naturally, people come through. And I look back at that and think, well, if the standards were better or the systems were better or, all of that upkeep was better, then, would have been a better result. But I was just, it was a good wake up call at that time. And I had written the whole fish, and 2 days later, after being up in Brisbane, then I got to go overseas and travel with the book, and got to see lots of different things and have some good experiences. And then coming back, it was a real kind of head down, bum up mentality, where it's let's do the best we can. Let's make the food exactly how we want to make it. And then getting to, I think, 2 weeks before we all got locked down last year, we got reviewed again, and I was really happy with what we did. The photos got taken, and then the weekend that we all got shut down, the Tuesday after was meant to be, good food in the paper. And I think at that time it was like, I was really disappointed, because I wanted something to remunerate the staff with for such a huge amount of effort and attention going in at a time when we all wanted to prove that we were kind of better than what had been said. And I don't know, there was a lot of it was a flattening experience to get locked down, obviously, because we were scared and we didn't really know what to do. But then I just kind of went into the mode of Mr. Niland at home, and I just, it was almost like starting again. You work, sleep, work, repeat. And I think COVID for me personally was the best thing for me personally to happen, because it allowed me time to spend with the kids. It allowed me more time to spend with Julie. It allowed me more time to think, well, am I really happy professionally? Like, am I happy with what we're turning out? Is the direction of the restaurant the way that I want it to be? And yeah, we made some big decisions. We said, all right, well, let's tidy up the kitchen upstairs. Let's really make that more of a workable space, because that's always been difficult. So St. Peter had its own prep kitchen upstairs. And then what's the restaurant that we really want to have? And I remember talking to you about it. I said, it's going to be a hybrid of Swan Oyster Depot meets St. John meets Angler meets Saison, all those things that, I like about a restaurant. And we just said, we're just going to put 16 seats along the front of it. And where I suppose at times I've felt challenged about passing on information or details of the menu, I've been always challenged as to how to continue to pass on the kind of really granular details of the menu to our front of house team, because we change it every day. And I think that's part of what's special about St. Peter, at least it is for me. But having the knowledge to then pass on and to be passed on to the guest, I think was just somewhere that we always lacked. And to open it up so that the chefs and the front of house team could work together and speak to the work that we'd done and the products that we were serving over the counter some 1.5 meters away. Like, that was so exciting for us. And St. Peter really found a bit of a new life, and more joy and just more happiness. Like, I was far happier and prouder of the product, and the room had grown up. And I know Julie and I speak for Julie as well. Like, we was amazed at how beautiful the room could become with more attention. And that was a really good thing to happen. And we had a really good some 10 or 12 months before them being locked down again. But the lockdown this second time is actually it's almost just like rolling through. And I mean, I can't speak to the 300 days now that Melbourne have had, but for Sydney to have had such a good run for a full year and then go back into it, like, I felt better this time. Like, I felt, the team was ready for it because it was a similar team to the one that we closed with last time. Yeah, that was, yeah. And then the second lockdown brought about the thinking of charcoal fish, because again, I found myself having nights off. Like, you leave work at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon after sending out your Mr. Niland at home products, to then go home early, and then you cook dinner and you put the kids to bed and you do all those wonderful, nice things that are normal. And then you kind of get sick of cooking at home, and then you're like, all right, well, let's go and get Charlie's. Let's go get the charcoal chicken around the corner, just because that's a really easy dinner. And I'm like, wow, this is an amazing, easy, accessible model that's such a pleasure to use. And it's not junk food, it's not health food, it's just dinner. And I just thought that's so necessary and so what's needed with fish. There is no ease of access to just nice, easy, beautiful grilled fish. And that was, it then just became like every day to Julia, I'm like, we need to find this site. We need to find this site. And it was just unrelenting. And I just kept, drawing what it looked like and menus, all that sort of stuff. And then, 12 months later well, not even 12 months later, shorter than that, like we're standing in it. And we're flat out, and it's exciting. And I haven't cooked the way that I'm cooking now since I was 18 with Steve. And, it's a really nice feeling to see people, a new generation of young people coming in with their families and having a great fish and chips or having a great grilled piece of fish. I think that's a wonderful thing.
Well, at Charcoal Fish, there's a real celebration of Murray cod. Tell us why that is and why it benefits from that sort of cooking style.
Yeah, Murray cod's a unique fish. I got asked the other day, is Charcoal Fish playing host to a cellar door for a kuna? And I wish it was, but it's just a kuna has been able to produce this wonderful cod, basically, that's white fleshed, really firm, dense, meaty, very savory kind of taste, and the skin is a little bit thicker than what you would find on other species like snappers and flatheads and things. But because I've been working with it now for quite a while, we've developed so many ideas around what it can be, and I never like looking at fish as a vehicle. Like, I always like seeing unique details of each fish and what they should go with based on their characteristics. But Murray cod is just one of those versatile fish, and I'm saying this with all kindness to this fish, but it is so similar to chicken and so similar to pork that it allows you to really just remove straight away the fact that it's a fish. You can put it aside, like forget that it's a fish, and then as soon as you do that, then just it's Pandora's box in terms of opportunity. And the reason for the selection of it specifically for charcoal fish is because I can generate 95% return. And that because of the thinking of Rebecca Lara at Fish Butchery, the thinking of Paul Farag, the thinking of myself, all of our team that has worked with us, even back to Alana Sapwell. Like, charcoal fish, to me, it's a necessary business model that brings ease and accessibility and full transparency to a new generation of customer that really does demand more. There's so many people that want the knowledge of where their fish is from, how it was caught, how it was captured, and, like a bit of a location and some knowledge behind it and confidence so that they can see the value. So many times that we see, $12.50, $13.50 fish and chips. How do you do that? I'm still stumped by how you can produce that caliber of dish for that cheap. At the moment, our fish and chips is $28, and I know that is expensive, but to me, the chips are getting produced by our team. So the potatoes come in dirty, they get scrubbed, and then they get chipped by us, and then they get steamed, par fried, and then fried to order. And then the fish, the Murray cod is not a cheap fish. It's $20 a kilo, whole, scale on, guts in. And
like I said, the return is far better with this business model. It allows us to utilize 95%. We can use the fat, we can use the liver, we can use the scales, we can use the eyes. There's so many things that we can use. And all the bones and all the trimmings go into our gravy that we make to do the Murray cod gravy roll. So, I mean, the chicken shop model is actually the best model to look at when opening a fish shop. Or the butcher model, the meat butchery model, is the best possible model that we can be looking at with reference to how to set up a fish shop. So, I mean, speaking just as a general overview of all of this, there's so much that we could be learning from the world of meat and poultry with regards to then how we handle fish. You know, to give you a hypothetical, like I grew up with mum going into a local butcher and saying, you know, can I get a few sausages today? Or like, you know, the butcher, saying to my mum, you know, we've just made sausages. And so then mum would be like, great, let's get half a dozen. We'll go and have sausages tonight. And then the following week, then we go back and he's just corned some beef ready to go. And so that was what we had for dinner. There was clear communication. It was understood what he had done, what his work was, and then the fact that then we were taking that home and that was our dinner. There is a matrix for every single part of the animal that goes to use. I mean, you just think about families that rear an animal from birth through to slaughter. You know, there is nothing saying that they're going to just take the top loins off or they're just going to take the racks out. You know what I mean? Like, that's what we're talking about when we refer to fish. Like, if we're only engaging with the fillets, then we're only engaging with half of the product.
You've now got 3 incredible businesses. What's the best business advice that you've ever been given in hospitality?
Oh, goodness. Well, I don't know. It's almost a metaphor. Like Stephen saying, like, you know, this was again when I worked at Fish Face for the very first time. It was walking into the morning and walking, you know, through the front door around the bar at Darlinghurst there, and then into the kitchen, and then you start working through everything you needed to do, and you know, you're running yourself around, and then he would come in at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon if we were lucky, and then he would walk through the same front doors and then get to the front of the kitchen. And as much as there was pleasantries from time to time with a hello and how are you, it was usually, you know, did you clean the glass? And it's like, what do you mean? And he said, well, look at the glass, it's filthy. Like, did you clean the glass? I said, well, no, I thought, you know, the front of house was coming in. That's, you know, that's what they're going to do. And without, you know, ranting off the expletives that come along with that, then it should have been done. And I mean, I think that kind of sense of responsibility that, you know, even though it's not your personal business, details matter, like so many details that aren't seen. And I mean, I've learned now that cooking is such a secondary thing that happens, you know what I mean? That's the fun part. That's like, you know, having been spoilt for the last 3 weeks standing in front of a big grill down at Charcoal Fish has been like being a kid again. It's like awesome. It's like the most fun thing to do, even though you're under the pump and, you know, we're turning out a lot of food. That's really fun. And so much so that it almost feels lazy, that I'm not actually doing the real work, where, you know, the work of leading and mentoring and all those things and the details of our other businesses need to be seen, you know what I mean? And I need to be able to go and do those things. But I think it's an interesting time that you've called because, you know, we're at this point right now where we're like, wow, we've got 3 shops now. And there's a lot of work to do. And it's not just standing there grilling fish all day, because that would be wonderful if I was able to do that. But, yeah, I think Stephen's message was just, you know, the little details matter, and just to make sure that nothing goes unseen. You need to be on top of everything. And that's from a financial point of view through to leadership and how you retain and maintain standards and look after your people. I mean, Julie and I have made some quite huge decisions in the last week alone, or even in the last 2 days, about the forward planning and thinking around the businesses and how we're best going to approach summer. I was never expecting charcoal fish to be received the way that it has. It's been really, wonderful and exciting. But I feel that's indicative of how Sydney is going to return to its dining scene. Like Neil put it a couple of weeks ago, he said there's going to be a stampede. And I believe that, like, the depravity of not having the joy of a meal has just got to the point where we're all just busting at the seams to get out and celebrate, food and social, the joys of life, basically. So we're seeing a bit of that at the moment at Charcoal Fish. It's been that goosebump kind of moment, seeing people really excited again and genuine enthusiasm for something new.
St. Peter started when you and Julie wanted to start a family and stay in Sydney and build your own business, and now you have 3 establishments. What are you most proud of over this time?
I'm proud of Julie, and I'm proud of her resilience and ability to, work so hard, and all the work that she does is so unseen. I kind of get to take the cream on top. Like, I get the cream on top and the cherry. But then she's the one who does such a large amount of our work, making sure that our business, is maintained, and just the maintenance and the upkeep of any business is extraordinary. Not often seen as glamorous parts of the work, but to have been a chef, to then, now owning and operating a restaurant and being a mum and, all of those things, to be able to, transition through that as easily and intelligently as I've ever seen. She's extraordinary. So I think I'm most proud of our resilience as a friendship and as a partnership. I think that's what I'm most proud of, because, it's not the easiest industry. It's not conducive, or historically has been conducive to maintaining good relationships and good friendships and all of those things. So that would be what I'm most proud of. And our kids are healthy and happy, and our teams are strong and we're going well. But I think 10 years married and nearly 13 years together. I'm really proud of that.
Well, Josh, what you both have achieved is so extraordinary, and I know there's so much more to come as well. We've loved having you on the Luminaries on Deep in the Weeds today to hear your story. Please keep in touch, and we'll catch up again soon.
Thanks, Hux. I know that all of our chats always end up into this kind of like leaning back into the psychiatrist chair and, unpacking all the bits that are deep on my mind at the moment, and you have picked the right moment to have a chat. But you being able to offer that to this industry is a wonderful thing. This isn't a fleeting idea to give chefs a little bit of a voice, and it shouldn't be seen as a hype chat. You know what I mean? This is like just real conversation, and hence why there's some honesties in this chat that we've just had, that, I feel, this isn't about me. This is, I hope somebody listening thinking, well, that kind of sounds a little bit the same or similar. And, with Instagram painting a certain picture and with, things that you read and see and hear and everything, it's not without, the other half that you don't want people seeing on Instagram and things. So to everybody out there with a lot on their minds and a lot on their plates and things not gearing the way that they had ever hoped, please remain resilient. Please remain tough. See it as an opportunity and see it as a moment in time that we all just weathered together. And, I know circumstances are harder than others for some, but, there is help. There is always attention that can be given to you. Just reach out. But thank you to you, Hux, and well done, Australia. We're almost there. We're getting there. Hang on.
Well, Josh, thanks, mate. You're an absolute legend, and we'll catch up again soon.
Thanks, Hux.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.